In this episode, we move into a part of modern technology that many organizations depend on every day, even when the people using it are not thinking very much about where the systems actually live or who is helping operate them behind the scenes. Cloud computing matters to the Certified Information Systems Auditor, CISA, learner because it changes more than hardware location. It changes ownership, control, visibility, accountability, and the way security responsibilities are divided between the organization and an outside provider. For a beginner, that shift can feel confusing because the cloud often sounds like something abstract or distant, when it is really just computing services delivered in a more flexible and shared way. What makes the topic important is not the marketing language around speed and convenience. What matters is that cloud services can support the business very well, but they also introduce new risks, new assumptions, and new audit questions. Once you understand that cloud security is really about protecting data, controlling access, and proving accountability in an environment you do not fully own, the subject becomes much more practical and much easier to follow. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good place to begin is with the basic idea of what cloud computing actually means. Instead of buying, hosting, and managing every piece of technology inside its own facilities, an organization can use computing resources that are delivered as services by a provider. Those resources may include storage, processing power, applications, databases, and development platforms. The appeal is easy to understand because the organization can often scale faster, pay more flexibly, and avoid building everything from scratch. At the same time, the move changes the control environment. Some technical tasks that once happened inside the company are now handled by a provider, and some data that once stayed in a company-owned environment may now be stored or processed somewhere outside direct physical control. That does not automatically create weak security, but it does change how security must be understood. The cloud is not just someone else's computer in a casual sense. It is a service relationship with technical, legal, operational, and governance consequences, which is exactly why auditors need to understand both the convenience and the risk. One of the most important early concepts in cloud security is that not all cloud services are the same. Infrastructure as a Service, IaaS, gives the organization access to basic computing resources such as virtual servers, storage, and networking, while still leaving the customer responsible for many configuration and security decisions. Platform as a Service, PaaS, provides a managed environment for building or running applications, which means the provider handles more of the underlying platform while the customer focuses more on applications and data. Software as a Service, SaaS, delivers a finished application that users can access without managing most of the supporting infrastructure at all. These differences matter because security responsibility changes depending on the service model. A beginner might assume the cloud provider secures everything, but that is not how it works. The more the provider manages, the less the customer may control directly, yet the customer still remains responsible for important areas such as data protection, user access, approval, and proper use. From an audit perspective, understanding the service model is one of the first steps in understanding where control really sits. That leads directly to one of the most important ideas in this topic, which is the shared responsibility model. The provider and the customer both play roles in protecting the environment, but they do not protect the same things in the same way. In a cloud setting, the provider may be responsible for the physical facilities, core infrastructure, and certain managed services, while the customer remains responsible for how its own data, identities, access settings, and business processes are handled. The exact division varies by service model, but the central lesson stays the same. Moving to the cloud does not transfer all responsibility to the vendor. It changes responsibility, and sometimes that change creates dangerous misunderstandings. If managers assume the provider is covering every control, gaps can appear in areas like access review, data classification, logging, or secure configuration. For a CISA student, This is a critical mindset shift because many cloud control failures happen not because nobody cared about security, but because people made incorrect assumptions about who was supposed to do what. Cloud deployment choices also shape the security conversation. A public cloud environment uses shared provider infrastructure to deliver services to multiple customers in a logically separated way. A private cloud is designed for one organization, even if it still uses cloud-style delivery methods. A hybrid cloud combines multiple environments, which may include internal systems and external provider services working together. Each approach offers different benefits and different risks. A public cloud may provide strong scalability and efficient service delivery, but it requires confidence in isolation, provider controls, and contract terms. A private model may offer more direct control, but often with higher management burden and cost. A hybrid environment can support flexibility and business needs very well, yet it also creates complexity because data, access, and workloads move across boundaries. For auditing, the important point is not deciding that one model is always best. The important point is understanding how the chosen deployment approach affects governance, visibility, control design, and the organization's ability to protect what matters most. Identity is one of the most important control areas in cloud security because cloud services are often accessed over networks by many different users, systems, and applications. If identity controls are weak, then the environment can be exposed very quickly, even when the provider's infrastructure is sound. Identity and Access Management, IAM, helps control who can sign in, what they can reach, and what actions they can perform once access is granted. Least privilege matters here just as much as it does in traditional environments, because excessive permissions create unnecessary risk. Multi-factor authentication, MFA, is also especially valuable in cloud settings because stolen passwords remain one of the easiest paths into accounts. If an administrator, developer, or contractor account has broad access and weak authentication, the resulting exposure can be very serious. Auditors therefore pay close attention to user provisioning, privileged access, account review, role design, and the removal of unnecessary rights. In the cloud, identity often becomes the new perimeter, which means poor access discipline can undo many other safeguards very quickly. Configuration management is another major theme because many cloud incidents do not come from some dramatic failure of advanced security technology. They come from simple mistakes in how services were set up. A storage location may be exposed too broadly. A network rule may allow more access than intended. A service account may have unnecessary permissions, or a security feature may be available but left disabled. Cloud environments make change easy, which is useful for the business but also risky if that speed is not governed carefully. Teams can create, modify, and connect resources very quickly, and that means weak oversight can lead to weak control. Good cloud security depends on secure baselines, approval processes where appropriate, review of critical settings, and ongoing attention to configuration drift over time. For beginners, this is an important lesson because cloud risk is often less about the technology itself and more about how humans use it. From an audit point of view, configuration discipline is one of the clearest areas where control maturity becomes visible through evidence, review, and repeatable process. Data protection remains central in the cloud because the business value usually sits in the information, not in the server or platform carrying it. When organizations move data into cloud services, they need to understand what kind of information is involved, how sensitive it is, where it is stored, how it is transmitted, who can access it, and what legal or contractual obligations apply. Cloud security is weak if the organization moves sensitive data into a convenient service without classifying it properly or deciding how that information should be protected. Encryption may play an important role here, both for stored data and for data moving between systems, but encryption by itself is not the whole answer. Access control, retention rules, backup decisions, and secure deletion practices also matter. Another key issue is data location, because organizations may need to know which regions or jurisdictions handle their information. For auditors, the crucial question is whether the organization treats cloud data with the same seriousness as any other important data, rather than assuming the provider's environment automatically solves the problem of confidentiality or privacy. Visibility can become more difficult in cloud environments, which is one reason monitoring and logging are so important. In a traditional on-premises environment, teams may feel closer to the systems because they manage the physical and technical layers more directly. In the cloud, some of that visibility depends on what the provider makes available and how the customer configures logging, alerting, and review. If logging is not enabled properly, or if nobody is reviewing the records that do exist, the organization may have poor awareness of suspicious activity, configuration changes, or misuse. This matters because cloud environments can change quickly, and attackers may take advantage of weak monitoring just as easily as they exploit weak access controls. Application Programming Interface, API, activity, administrative changes, failed login attempts, and unexpected data movement can all provide important clues when the organization is paying attention. Auditors want to see whether log sources are identified, retained, protected, and connected to meaningful oversight. A cloud environment that cannot be observed well is difficult to secure and even harder to audit with confidence. Resilience and availability are also major parts of cloud security, even though many people first think only about confidentiality. Cloud services are often adopted in part because they can improve flexibility, support growth, and reduce certain operational burdens, but those advantages do not remove the need for business continuity planning. Organizations still need to know how critical services will remain available, how data will be backed up, what recovery options exist, and how much disruption is acceptable if a provider issue occurs. A service level agreement, SLA, can help define expectations about uptime and support, but the existence of an SLA is not the same thing as guaranteed business resilience. A provider may meet a contractual target, and the customer may still suffer an unacceptable operational impact if applications are not designed well or if dependencies are poorly understood. Auditors therefore look beyond provider promises and into the organization's own planning. A mature cloud strategy includes recovery thinking, dependency mapping, backup arrangements, testing, and a realistic understanding that convenience does not eliminate the possibility of outages or service degradation. Another important area is third-party risk, because cloud security is never only about technical controls. It also involves vendor governance, contracts, oversight, and trust in outside organizations that help support critical operations. When a company adopts cloud services, it is relying on a provider's people, processes, physical safeguards, and supporting vendors in addition to its own internal controls. That means due diligence matters before adoption, and ongoing review matters after adoption. The organization should understand what the provider is committing to do, what evidence of control is available, how incidents are communicated, what audit rights exist, and what happens if the relationship changes or ends. It should also understand how subcontractors, hosting locations, and regulatory obligations affect the arrangement. From a CISA perspective, cloud adoption is a good example of why risk management and governance cannot be separated from technology. The provider may be strong, but the customer still needs to know what it is depending on, how that dependency is controlled, and whether leadership can justify the trust placed in that service relationship. When auditors review cloud environments, they are not usually trying to inspect every technical detail in isolation. They are trying to determine whether cloud use aligns with policy, risk appetite, business requirements, and effective control operation. That means cloud auditing often begins with governance questions. Why was the service adopted? Who approved it? What data is involved? Which service model is in use? And how are responsibilities defined between the organization and the provider? From there, the audit may review identity controls, configuration standards, change management, logging, incident response, backup planning, contract terms, and evidence of ongoing oversight. The auditor may also compare what the organization believes is happening with what is actually configured and documented. This is important because cloud environments can drift away from policy very easily if teams move quickly and documentation falls behind. Strong auditing in this area depends on connecting technical evidence to control objectives, which helps show not just whether the cloud service works, but whether it is governed and protected in a way the business can rely on. A few common misconceptions can make cloud security harder to understand, so it is helpful to clear them up directly. One misconception is that the cloud is automatically less secure than traditional systems simply because it is outside the company building. Another is the opposite belief that a major provider automatically makes everything secure by default. Both views are too simple. Cloud services can be very well protected, but only when the customer understands its responsibilities and uses the services with discipline. Another misconception is that once a contract is signed, security becomes mostly the vendor's problem. In reality, the customer still owns its data, its user behavior, its access decisions, its regulatory obligations, and many of the operational controls that determine whether the environment is used safely. Good cloud security, therefore, depends less on fear or blind trust and more on clear responsibility, good design, active oversight, and realistic understanding of how the environment actually works day to day. For a beginner, one of the most valuable ways to think about cloud auditing is as an exercise in asking good control questions in a different operating model. You still care about confidentiality, integrity, availability, accountability, and compliance. You still care about least privilege, monitoring, change control, segregation of duties, and evidence. What changes is the way those concerns show up and the way control responsibilities are divided across organizational and provider boundaries. That is why cloud auditing is not a separate universe. It is the familiar work of assurance applied to a new delivery model. If the organization understands its data, defines its expectations clearly, manages access carefully, reviews configurations regularly, and monitors the environment with discipline, then cloud use can support the business very effectively. If those things are neglected, then the convenience of the cloud may simply allow bad practices to spread faster and at greater scale. The auditor's role is to test whether the promised control environment is real, complete, and operating as intended. By the time you finish studying this topic, cloud security concepts and auditing should feel much more grounded in practical control thinking and much less like a vague discussion about modern technology trends. The cloud changes where services run and who helps manage them, but it does not change the basic need to protect data, control access, monitor activity, prepare for failure, and prove that responsibilities are understood. The strongest lesson to carry forward is that cloud security is shared, dynamic, and deeply tied to governance rather than being solved by provider reputation alone. For the CISA learner, that makes this subject especially important because it brings together risk management, operational discipline, third-party oversight, and technical control awareness in one place. When you look at cloud services through that lens, the topic stops being abstract. It becomes a very practical question of whether the organization can safely rely on an environment it does not fully own while still meeting its business, legal, and security responsibilities with confidence.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.